afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. I'm Jennifer Lavasser, curator for this exhibition, Moving Beyond Earth, and welcome to What's New in Aerospace, sponsored by Boeing. Today, you're going to get a chance to hear from someone who's been a long ways from home for quite a long time, 197 days in space. I want you to join me in welcoming her in just a moment, but let me first tell you a little something about our guest today. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering from our nearby neighbor, George Washington University. She has her medical degree from the University of Texas. She was employed as a flight surgeon at NASA starting in 2006 and joined the astronaut corps in 2009. She spent 2 years training and also spent some time in Antarctica in training underwater. Please welcome to the stage Serena Auñón-Chancellor.
Thanks. Hey, welcome everybody to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. It's really cool to be with you guys today. I know we've got multiple states represented, probably multiple countries, but it's always fun. This is one of my most favorite places to come back to because you guys came into this museum because you love space, right? Yeah, right? Okay. So what I'm going to do today, just spend a little bit of time. I'm going to show a very short movie, about 7 minutes long. And it's basically a movie clip of what our time was like on board ISS. I'm going to ask a favor of you guys, if you guys will respect that, not to film the movie, please, on your phones. You can take as many still photographs as you want. But this is NASA property in itself, and it's what we use to try and educate and teach around the country and across the world. So with that, we'll get that movie started, and I'll let you know what our life was like during that 197 days. So this is the crew that I worked with, Expedition 56 and 57. Only 3 names in that patch, and that was a good reason why. We'll talk about that. We spent 19 days in quarantine in Kazakhstan, and here we were on launch day getting suited up and heading out to the bus, to the launch pad, saying goodbye to our families for the very last time. We're being walked out to the rocket itself. It's very traditional right as you get up to the steps for them to kick you in the butt and send you on your way to the rocket. And very shortly, we're about to get strapped in for quite a ride. Space station. Had to turn that volume up. You got to feel what a rocket launch is like for real. 2-day ride to the space station for my crewmates, myself, Alex, and Sergey. Waving to you, first time in microgravity. And then after about 2 days of travel, there we see the ISS. ISS is huge. It's one of the largest objects in the night sky. Who's seen the ISS pass overhead? All right, excellent. This is the docking screen that we do see inside the vehicle. It's on the Russian, you see a lot of Russian letters. We pulled into station. That's an automatic sequence the vehicle uses to pull in. And then we finally had a successful docking on June 8th. It was really cool to see our friends, Drew, Ricky, and Oleg. There's another picture of Drew Feustel right over here behind me. They were waiting for us to get there the whole time. We're giving big hugs. You see Sergey coming here. And then you see Alex behind Sergey, and Alex brought with him this little brown mouse from Germany. It's a very popular cartoon character. And then I'm giving Drew Feustel a huge hug right here, and then you'll notice Drew just kind of gets out of my way because I don't move very well yet, and he just figured he'd give me a wide berth there since it was my first few moments on space station. We got a few days to rest, and then the work really begins. These are all of our cargo vehicles that come up delivering critical science, food, medicines, everything to station. Dragon, HTV-7 in the lower left-hand screen, also the Northrop Grumman spacecraft. And again, all that science they're bringing up, we have to unload it really quickly. And so you'll see a time lapse that Ricky filmed here. And that's us offloading one of these vehicles so that the science can begin. And we did science every week on station. That's cancer therapy research on the lower right, First time we sequenced RNA and DNA in the upper right, even grew algae in space. I had the great fortune of being in charge of a lot of the plant experiments while we were there on board the space station. And there's nothing quite like smelling something green and being able to touch it up there in space where it's a very sterile environment. This is our cupola, our window to the Earth. You'll see Alex's head pop out here in a little second there as he's filming it. But we did a lot of research on ourselves as well. A lot of blood draws.
Become a volunteer at the National.
Ooh, that's loud. This is what we saw outside the cupola. I'm louder than she is. And we'd see this every day. We'd circle the Earth every 90 minutes. And then we had Spheres experiment going on up here. And again, I'm doing a little more sequencing. And if any of you are scientists out there and have learned how to use a pipette, this is what I'm about to do up here on the space station. We had a lot of fun too. We tried to fit every one of us into one crew quarters, and we made it. And we would eat together almost every night. And this was in Node 1, the galley inside the space station. And although we stood upright, we got to play with our food a little bit too. So remember, space station is huge, size of a 5-bedroom house. It's not cramped up there. Here you're going to see our first lettuce harvest. This is dragoon lettuce we grew in 22 days, and we were having a lettuce happy hour there on board space station. And then a little more fun because, you know, we were there in October. And you'll see here in a second, Alex is getting set up for Parkinson's research actually, which I'll talk about. And you know, we turned, Sergei made a really good Russian Elvis, so we put him in this fantastic outfit. But it's really hard to describe the views that we have up here, and again, this video only does it a little bit of justice. This was on capture day in the cupola when we're preparing to bring that vehicle in. Well, as you remember, in October, there was a Soyuz that launched that actually aborted during the launch phase. The crew was safe, they were fine, but we didn't know when the next crew would come up, so it was really cool to see Anne McLean, who I'm about to give a big hug to in a second here. She's an Army helicopter pilot, and she is on board station right now. They're scheduled to land on June 24th. So Anne and David and Oleg came to join us. And David is from the Canadian Space Agency. He's also a physician and an astrophysics PhD. And finally behind him, Oleg Kononenko, who this is his 4th long-duration space flight. This man has spent a lot of time on board the space station. But we had the really difficult task of turning over all of space station in 17 days and teaching these guys how to move, because we had gotten pretty good by this point. It's a lot of fun. Yep, exactly right. The Russians did a spacewalk very shortly after docking, and that's what you're going to see here in a second. Very successful yet complicated spacewalk for them. Took about 7 to 8 hours for them to complete. And then very shortly after the spacewalk was completed, our crew was heading home. This is the day of hatch closure. We're going to close that hatch, undock from the space station, and you'll see what I saw outside my window there. Basically, fiery re-entry. Successful parachute deploy, which is always the best part of any mission. And the Russians pull us out of the capsule. And here we are on the ground, first time on terra firma, and wintertime was beautiful. It wasn't cold, or at least we didn't feel it. It was just fantastic to be back on the Earth again and then go to see our families. All right, I hope you all enjoyed that short film.
We'll sit here and have a little chat and learn a little bit more, I think. So I brought up the fact that you have an electrical engineering degree, but you are a medical doctor. So you made a switch, but tell us a little bit about why you made that decision, but also how that then influenced your life aboard a space station.
Yeah, so making that decision, I actually decided during my undergraduate years at GW, I maintained my engineering curriculum, but I decided to go pre-med, so basically to get ready to go to medical school. Somewhat through the encouragement of my friends who said, hey, we think you'd make a good doctor. And at first I thought that's way too much work. But then I changed my mind and went pre-med. How that helped me on space station, especially as a physician, I don't know if a lot of people know about the science we do on the space station. They think it only applies to space exploration, right? Very untrue. So the science we do on space station actually applies to each and every one of you down here, because we're doing research on cancer. We're doing research on Parkinson's disease. We're doing research on Alzheimer's. And these are all things that at least everybody in this room knows somebody that's impacted by each of these processes. And you'd say, well, how are you doing that research? Why does that even apply? Well, it turns out that cells grow very differently in microgravity. They really like to grow up there, and it allows scientists to test medications like never before. The other thing it lets us do is because proteins grow differently, they grow very 3D, they grow larger and better ordered. It allows researchers who are trying to find better medications to treat diseases like Parkinson's to fine-tune those medications. People say, can't you do that on the ground? Where's your anti-gravity chamber? Do you think we have one of those down here?
They think we have one at the museum.
They think we do, right. We can't do that down here, and that's why it's important to know that we can only do that on board ISS.
Great. So as a doctor on board a space station where you are 250 or so miles above the Earth with not a quick way back to Earth, what happens if somebody gets sick? If somebody, I mean, we get sick here on Earth, you know, kids, you get a stomach virus, or you may have a cold or something like that, or you cut your finger.
Yeah.
What do you as the doctor do? What kinds of equipment do you have? I mean, I presume you'd be really well prepared to take care of just about anything.
You pretty much are prepared to take care of a lot of things. The great thing to remember is because we spend 19 days in quarantine prior to launch, we should not, knock on wood, should not launch with any viruses to station. And there aren't any viruses up there. So luckily we don't have to deal with common colds that you folks deal with down here because of what you're exposed to. Trauma though, simple cuts, sprains, scrapes. We've got a pretty extensive medical kits on orbit with all kinds of medication, ways to fix any sorts of trauma, antibiotics even to treat infections. And everybody on the crew is actually trained to the same level. I am a physician, so I have a higher level of training, but Ann McLean, who you see working next to me in that picture, is an Army helicopter pilot. She was trained actually to a basic EMT level to treat some of these conditions.
So everybody's prepared.
Everybody's prepared.
So you talked a little bit about tending plants, and the Veggie Experiment is one of our favorites here at the museum because it is so much like what we do on Earth. I have a garden in my backyard. I don't know who else, any other astronauts who may have a garden, but tell us a little bit about sort of does that have some effect for you other than just the science?
Oh yeah, psychologically. So I was lucky enough to get assigned the Veggie Experiment, and I'd be sitting right in front of this contraption, which is where it was growing, and I'd stick my entire head in just to smell the plants, because you could smell the moisture in the earth and just smell the green. Mm-hmm. And my crewmates would float by and ask me what I was doing because they just saw me with my head sticking into a chamber. Tremendous psychologic value as well, behavioral, but just to have that fresh food up there on station is amazing because most of what we eat, as you know, is packaged, just like military meals.
Right. I was going to ask about food. How often were you getting fresh food? Because you have prepackaged food, there's all kinds of, you have a great menu to select from, but that's been made months and months and months before you go up there. So yeah. How great is it to enjoy a fresh apple?
Oh, that's fantastic. And anytime we'd get fresh fruit up there, it would always be cut into 6 segments because we would always share it with every crew member. No one ever just grabbed an apple and ate it. And actually, funny enough, our most favorite fresh vegetable that we would get on the station was an onion.
Really?
Funny enough as that sounds, because it's crisp, it's tart, it's pungent, it has a very strong taste. And these are feelings we haven't had for some time with a lot of the other more mushy food that we eat. So an onion was the preferred vegetable of choice, we'll say, for our crew.
So what kind of applications would you have for an onion?
Oh, it gets better. We'd have burger night on the U.S. segment.
Oh boy.
So our Russian brethren would come down, and we didn't have hamburger buns, so we used tortillas. We had freeze-dried beef patties, so we'd rehydrate those. And we had ketchup, mustard, and mayonnaise, and then we'd have the onion. And let me tell you, when everybody was eating that burger on a tortilla, it was silent because everybody was enjoying it so much.
So was the burger your favorite food? We always get questions about what your favorite food was to eat in space.
I think so, one of my favorites, because I really did miss a good cheeseburger, we'll say that.
Did you ever get ice cream sent up? Because we get the question as historians all the time, do astronauts eat ice cream in space? And I always tell them, well, that didn't happen way back when, but it happens today.
It does. So people think we eat the astronaut ice cream that you can buy here at the Smithsonian. It's actually not what we eat up there. You see me holding a freezer actually right now, and we would get very small allotments of ice cream bars and little ice cream cups sent up to us when we'd have a cargo vehicle like Dragon or Orbital, because they had small refrigerated sections.
We've talked, now you brought up temperature. I was going to ask, what's it like temperature-wise on the station? What kind of environment is it, and what are the things that you need to be careful about in that environment?
So certainly the station is a really nice 70 to 72 degrees all the time. We would drop the temperature at night. These are our crew quarters that you see everybody sticking their head out of. And we would keep that a little cooler at nighttime. But we're always dealing with biological samples that we're putting into our minus 80 degree freezer. That's the Melfi. So we always had to wear protective gloves. You never want to pull a maneuver where you stick your tongue to anything to see if it'll stick. It will. And so we're always conscious of certainly storing our samples in those cold temperatures. Looking
at this picture, we see lots of different things. If we can bring that particular picture back up, you see lots of things sticking to the walls.
Yes.
I've noticed in some of them a strange package with a little top on it that I used when I had my 2 kids. Wipes. What are the wipes for?
We use wipes are kind of our generic napkin on orbit. We had dry wipes and wet wipes. So because you couldn't just turn on a faucet to clean something and get water, we needed something else with a little moisture in it to clean our silverware at the end of a meal or anything like that. So we used a lot of wipes, but we were limited as to how many wipes we could use on a daily basis.
So the other thing you don't have in space, and we talk a lot here at the museum about living on the space station being a little bit like a camping trip. You don't have a lot of access to things. You've got to take it all with you. But you also have to take all your clothes with you. You don't have a washing machine on board, so what do you do with all of your clothes?
So we get allotted what they call a 2-week brick. And brick just meaning it's a 2-week Ziploc bag about this big of every bit of clothing you get for a 2-week period. So it's about 1 shirt every week, 1 pair of socks, 1 pair of underwear every 3 days. Pants last a long time, so I won't tell you how long we wore those. But we don't have a washing machine on orbit, so at the end of that 2-week cycle, we would just toss all that away. Yeah, so it would come down. So it seems like a lot of waste, but at the same time, we stretch out how long we can wear those clothes as long as possible. And funny enough, because your clothes don't stick to you up there, they kind of float off your body compared to down here, they didn't smell as bad, or at least that's what we told ourselves.
I'll ask about one other question, one other thing that you do in space in just a moment, but I wanted to let you all know that if you have any questions here in the audience, just let us know. We have a microphone that we can bring over and have you ask some questions of your own. But you talked about smelliness. One thing you have to spend a lot of time doing in space is something I spent an hour doing this morning, was going to the gym.
Yes.
So in preparing to go to space, were you excited about doing that much exercise in space, or was it just something you knew was part of the way it happened?
Actually, yeah, we are excited because we also know that the moment you get up into space, your bones and your muscles begin to break down almost immediately. So for us, it's almost more of a health hazard not to do it. So crew members get really upset if that exercise gets bumped from their schedule. Usually mission control makes that exercise a priority. So unless we are dealing with a critical failure on station, everybody gets their exercise in. Because even with all that exercise, we still see bone loss in every crew member just at the end of a 6-month mission.
And we're starting to see other effects of spaceflight when people return. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the effects that we've learned about in, say, the year-long mission that Scott Kelly took, where there's effects now we're finding on the eyes and other parts of the body?
Yeah, and it's funny, the eye findings that we've seen, we can't pinpoint who exactly will get those eye findings, but what we're seeing are changes in the shape of the eyeball itself or the globe, also in the nerve, that big optic nerve that supplies the back of the eye. Sometimes that causes difficulty with reading more close up when they're on board the space station. Funny enough, we've seen it more in men than we have in women, but it's still something that we're investigating to see if there are kind of causes that we might be able to detect early as to why these might be happening.
So space, a microgravity, it's not entirely zero gravity, but a microgravity environment does affect the human body. It changes things. You're not just floating, but it does things to the human body. Can you tell us what a few of those are, and then maybe talk a little bit about the least favorite of those that you experienced?
Yeah, so I talked about bone and muscle, which a lot of folks understand pretty quickly. Funny enough, it impacts your immune system as well and your ability to fight off infection. Now, do we have lots of infections and illness up there? No, we don't, but they've looked at markers in the saliva and in the urine that show that we're getting kind of a viral reactivation that scientists are beginning to see. And so certainly changes in your body, I don't really call it a change, but of course going to the bathroom is one of these things that on Earth you don't think twice about, but up there Every day it's a challenge. And you get better and better every day, but let me tell you, gravity is your friend down here.
And as I understand it, you actually practice some of this on the ground before you even go to space.
You know, people tell you about it, and then they say, you know what, you're just going to figure it out when you get up there.
So you mentioned the cupola. There's a great shot of you
That's me fixing
in
the
the toilet.
Yeah.
And that's part of the job too, is that
Absolutely.
you're not just up there to do science. You have to
No.
maintain a space station that is the size of a football field.
I'd say 20 to 30% of the day is system maintenance, what we call preventive system maintenance. Kind of like an old house. If you wait too long, it will break. So we'll replace certain parts preemptively on a very scheduled basis, like parts of the toilet that you saw me holding there, to make sure they don't break down suddenly.
So you talked a little bit about in your video about the cupola, which is one of my favorite places to talk about
Me
because
too.
I'm interested in looking at Earth from space and how that happens. Tell us a little bit about some of the unusual things you can see from space. I think a lot of people think you look out the window and you see the Great Wall of China. That's not really true. What are some of the things that you really enjoyed looking at, and then some of those strange things you couldn't, really figure out?
You know, honestly, so people ask me a lot, hey, what was your favorite part about looking out of the cupola? What was the favorite thing you saw? And honestly, the Earth is beautiful. It's very hard to describe, especially the Earth at night with weather and thunderstorms. To see a hurricane barreling across an ocean and realize how big and extensive that is, and that's a picture we took there. What amazed me more was on a day we had a cargo ship docking, where that cargo ship would fly up to station and hang out a couple hundred meters from the space station and then slowly, with very careful maneuvers, move its way in. To see that happen, like a bus pulling into a parking spot, and where it's so commonplace, is amazing. Because you think of where we've come, and that this is occurring really every couple of months. And these vehicles are that good at just making routine deliveries to space station. That, to me, is one of the most amazing things I saw outside that cupola window.
So another thing that we all do here on Earth, it's really important for our daily well-being, is sleep. You mentioned the sleep compartments, but as I understand it, every astronaut finds their own ways of sleeping. Some will float free, some like to be tied down tight. What was your preferred method?
So we all slept inside our sleeping bag because you really just couldn't float all around the cabin. Eventually you would hit something. Our crew quarters, as you see there, is only the size of a telephone booth. Most everybody in here, except the really little ones, know what that is. We all had a sleeping bag that was tied against the wall, and we'd kind of zip ourselves up, and then I tended to lodge my feet against one corner and I'd push my head against one side of the wall. So I felt like I was sleeping on something. And that's how I ended up sleeping almost every night.
So what was it like to finally get back and sleep in a real bed?
You know, the first night I slept pretty well because I was so tired from the long journey home from where we landed in Kazakhstan. It was actually amazing. I felt like maybe if I got up in the middle of the night, I wouldn't know where I was. I knew exactly where I was.
I've heard there is a big adjustment too in terms of just holding things in your hand and getting used to the fact that there's nothing that's going to hold it there when you let go.
Well, it's funny. So I used to hear these stories about how folks would like accidentally drop something. I think that's a big bunch of hooey because I never did that, and I was up there for almost 200 days. What we do, because up there you realize you can't let anything go or it floats away, I would find myself just holding lots of things at once, like my fork and my plate and my glass, and I would just sit there and hold it and then realize, no, gravity could help me, and I could put it down on the counter.
Well, that's another thing you notice in a lot of the pictures. There's lots of little squares of Velcro.
Everywhere.
There's lots of straps, so like bungee cords and things that'll keep everything in place. I'd imagine storage and just having an ability to put things places is incredibly important.
Storage is hugely important. It's usually when a crew comes back to Earth, you can see how cluttered it looks. And a lot of that's cabling and wires and laptops. But just anytime we pull stuff off a cargo vehicle, finding a place to put it was a huge challenge. But we want to make sure we have an appropriate amount of medication, food, certainly on orbit, clothing, everything. But as big a station is, it was always a challenge.
Do things get lost?
Oh, all the time. I must have lost my fork 15 times. And then the
I
whole crew helps
I heard
you
once
find
an
it.
iPad got caught behind something.
Oh, yeah.
It was gone for months.
Oh, we'd lose things, all tools as well, sometimes science, and then the whole crew stops what they're doing. We'd have to go find it. Yeah.
So you're away for 190 some days, but you haven't actually been near your family for even longer than that. Mm-hmm. What's it like to spend that much time away from your loved ones, and how do you communicate with them on a daily basis?
Yeah, it's hard. It's one of the hardest parts about being away for a long time is the time you are away from your family. So I had tons of pictures in my crew quarters. of my family, even my pets. I could pretty much call cell phones almost anytime I wanted to up there. So I talk with my husband almost daily, and then we'd have a weekly video conference where we could see them, but it's still hard when you can't feel them.
Right. Did you take any entertainment? Did you read books or watch any TV shows?
I did take a lot of books. We have an extensive movie and TV series library up there, so we'd all be watching something, and then we'd say, hey, I saw this, and you know, Drew was finishing up Game of Thrones, so he would, you know, finish that series, and then, but we'd always have movie night on Saturday night also.
And so you string up a big screen.
We have a big movie screen we string up, and we got pre-release films, which was really cool. We got to see First Man very early on, or we'd let the Russians pick the movie and they'd pick something, and so it was a lot of fun.
That's great. Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of what's happening on the space station today that's getting us ready for the next steps, because the International Space Station, at least as far as we know right now, is going to get some new kinds of visitors, hopefully maybe in the next few years. And NASA's going to move beyond the space station and go back to the moon and onto Mars. So how do we prepare for something like that? How are astronauts involved in experimenting or doing things for us to learn, you know, what it's going to take to go those extra steps?
Yeah, so absolutely. So certainly all the science, which I talked about, a lot of critical medical research are doing on orbit, but we plan to have boots on the ground, a woman and a man, on the surface of the moon by 2024. And that is in 5 years, which is not a lot of time. Just to stress that this is not with a fully extensive lunar habitat and everything's built and ready to go. That's just to show that we can do it and get somebody back there. Again, this is in preparation for us to go to Mars. So a lot of folks think we're just going back to the moon just to go back, and that is not the case. We have to go back to the moon to learn how to build things like a lunar habitat, make sure and test out our engineering technology before we send folks all the way to Mars, which is a very long trip. And make sure all of that works, especially protection of the human, the astronaut itself. And we have to make sure those procedures, that sort of technology is ready to go. Some of the experiments I did on space station, we actually began mixing cement in the microgravity environment to say, hey, how does that internal structure, the integrity of the cement change with no gravity? Turns out there's a lot of fluid bubbles everywhere, and that's because of surface tension forces. So I think it does change the structure of the cement. Then we had a small centrifuge, and they had a picture of me earlier that you saw inserting these little black canisters into a mini centrifuge that we have on board the station. So we were able to mix cement not only in 1/3 G, but 1/6 G. You can see it right here. And that's to simulate mixing cement on the surface of the moon or on the surface of Mars. Because if we plan to build habitats, we have to understand how that material science works.
And just to follow up with that, what are we learning about the ability of humans to survive in these kinds of kinds of environments? I mean, you were up there for 197 days. There's others that have spent even longer up there. What are some of the things that we're going to need to do to protect ourselves? Because space is a really dangerous place.
It is, and I think one of our biggest challenges moving forward is probably the radiation environment. People ask, hey, how much radiation did you get on your mission? We don't get a whole lot in low Earth orbit. We are very well protected. We have the shielding of the ISS itself, the Earth's atmosphere, the Earth's magnetic field, provides very good protection. Where that game changes is when we head to the moon and finally on to Mars, where we're worried more about things like solar particle events and what sort of damage that could do. And so radiation protection is one of the biggest challenges I think we have lying ahead of us.
Well, I want to have everybody join me in thanking you for coming to the museum today and just giving us some great information. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, yeah.
And thank you all for coming in today. We appreciate you coming in and getting a chance to see the museum and listen to some really, really interesting information about space.
Thanks,
So
everyone.
thank you all.
Thank you.